In the quiet suburbs of Denton County, Texas, where life often unfolds in predictable rhythms of work, family, and community, the evening of August 29, 2022, seemed no different from countless others. The modest home on a tree-lined street stood unassuming, its exterior blending seamlessly with the neighboring houses. Vinyl siding weathered by the relentless Texas sun, a small yard with a swing set gathering dust, and windows that reflected the fading twilight. To any casual observer strolling by with their dog or heading home from a late shift, it was just another residence where families navigated the ordinary challenges of daily existence. Yet, behind those closed doors, an invisible storm had been brewing for months. A toxic mix of marital discord, unspoken resentments, and the raw demands of new parenthood. The air inside was heavy, not just with the humidity of a late summer night, but with the weight of unresolved conflicts that had turned a once hopeful union into a battleground. And piercing through it all were the cries of a newborn, sharp and insistent, a soundtrack that amplified every fracture in the household's fragile foundation. As the clock ticked past midnight, the neighborhood's tranquility was about to be irrevocably shattered. Emergency vehicles would soon descend, their sirens cutting through the stillness like a knife, lights painting the street in alternating hues of red and blue. At the heart of this chaos was a local hospital's emergency room, a place accustomed to the urgency of life and death situations. Here, under the harsh fluorescent glare, a team of seasoned doctors, nurses, and technicians huddled around a tiny patient, a 28-day-old baby girl, her body limp and unnaturally cold. Paramedics had rushed her in following a desperate 911 call from the home, but even as they initiated protocols for resuscitation, a profound sense of anomaly settled over the room. The infant's skin was flawless, almost ethereal in its perfection, no visible burns that might suggest an accident with hot water or a stove, no bruises indicating a fall or abuse, no ligature marks hinting at strangulation. There were no external wounds, no signs of poisoning evident on the surface. It was as if death had claimed her without leaving a trace, a puzzle that defied the medical staff's collective experience. But as diagnostic tools were employed, X-rays, CT scans, and ultrasounds, the truth began to emerge. Layer by horrifying layer. The damage was internal, a catastrophe hidden beneath that unmarred exterior. Her organs, the delicate liver, the nascent stomach, the fragile intestines, bore the marks of severe thermal injury, as if they had been subjected to an intense, localized heat source capable of boiling tissues from within. Temperatures high enough to cause liquefaction in some areas, yet the skin remained intact, cool to the touch, without even the slightest reddening. This was no ordinary trauma. It was a medical enigma, a violation of physiological norms that left the ER team exchanging wide-eyed glances. Whispers circulated among the staff. How is this possible? What could cause internal cooking without external signs? Seasoned professionals, who had seen everything from car accidents to overdoses, found themselves grappling with a scenario that felt ripped from the pages of a horror novel rather than a real-life medical chart. The questions multiplied in the minds of everyone present. In the supposed safety of a family home, surrounded by the comforts of cribs, bottles, and baby monitors, how could such devastation occur? What insidious force could target a child's vital core while leaving the shell deceptively whole? As investigators were summoned and the pieces of the puzzle began to assemble, the answers would not only stun the tight-knit community of Denton County but send shockwaves across the United States. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a stark confrontation with the darkest corners of human psychology, forcing society to reckon with an uncomfortable truth. What combination of seething rage, untreated despair, and momentary madness could drive an individual, specifically a mother, to commit an act so profoundly heinous that it challenges our very understanding of humanity's boundaries? Welcome to this extended, in-depth episode of The Killer Next Door, where we peel back the layers of the world's most perplexing and psychologically wrenching criminal cases. Our channel is dedicated to not just recounting the facts but exploring the why behind the what, the human elements that turn ordinary lives into cautionary tales. We thank you, our dedicated viewers, for joining us on this journey into the shadows. Your support allows us to bring these stories to light with the depth and sensitivity they deserve. If you're prepared to delve into the uncomfortable realities of mental health, relationships, and justice, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's begin this exploration together. To truly comprehend the cataclysmic events of that fateful August night, we must journey back to the roots of the central figure in this tragedy, Clarissa Monroe. Born in 1985 in a small, conservative town in rural Texas, Clarissa's early life was shaped by an environment that prioritized structure over emotion, discipline over vulnerability. At 37 years old in the summer of 2022, she had cultivated an outward image of success and stability. As a registered nurse at a bustling hospital in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, she was known for her efficiency and composure. Colleagues described her as the go-to person in high-pressure situations, her hands steady during insertions, her voice calm when reassuring panicked patients or their families. She navigated the chaotic shifts with a quiet authority, often volunteering for extra hours in the pediatric ward, where her gentle touch seemed to soothe even the fussiest of young charges. But this professional veneer was a hard-won armor, forged in the fires of a childhood that offered little room for personal growth or emotional expression. Clarissa's family home was a bastion of rigid religiosity, dominated by her father, a retired Army veteran whose military background instilled a household regimen akin to boot camp. Meals were eaten in silence unless spoken to, chores were mandatory and inspected with precision, and any display of emotion, be it tears over a scraped knee or excitement about a school achievement, was dismissed as weakness. "Emotions are for the weak, control is for the strong," he would often say, quoting scripture to reinforce his edicts. Her mother, a homemaker who embodied quiet submission, rarely intervened, her own spirit subdued by years of living under the same authoritarian rule. In this atmosphere, young Clarissa learned early on that survival meant suppression. She buried her fears of the dark, her anxieties about fitting in at school, and her budding questions about the world deep inside, constructing walls that would. Conservative town in rural Texas, Clarissa's early life was shaped by an environment that prioritized structure over emotion, discipline over vulnerability. At 37 years old in the summer of 2022, she had cultivated an outward image of success and stability. As a registered nurse at a bustling hospital in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, she was known for her efficiency and composure. Colleagues described her as the go-to person in high-pressure situations, her hands steady during insertions, her voice calm when reassuring panicked patients or their families. She navigated the chaotic shifts with a quiet authority, often volunteering for extra hours in the pediatric ward, where her gentle touch seemed to soothe even the fussiest of young charges. But this professional veneer was a hard-won armor, forged in the fires of a childhood that offered little room for personal growth or emotional expression. Clarissa's family home was a bastion of rigid religiosity, dominated by her father, a retired Army veteran whose military background instilled a household regimen akin to boot camp. Meals were eaten in silence unless spoken to, chores were mandatory and inspected with precision, and any display of emotion, be it tears over a scraped knee or excitement about a school achievement, was dismissed as weakness. "Emotions are for the weak, control is for the strong," he would often say, quoting scripture to reinforce his edicts. Her mother, a homemaker who embodied quiet submission, rarely intervened, her own spirit subdued by years of living under the same authoritarian rule. In this atmosphere, young Clarissa learned early on that survival meant suppression. She buried her fears of the dark, her anxieties about fitting in at school, and her budding questions about the world deep inside, constructing walls that would later prove impermeable to even the most intimate relationships. Psychologists who study such upbringings often note that children in repressive environments develop coping mechanisms that can manifest as emotional detachment, or, conversely, explosive outbursts when the pressure becomes too great. For Clarissa, it was the former that predominated in her youth. She excelled in school, channeling her unexpressed energies into academics and extracurriculars like the debate team and volunteer work at the local church. By her late teens, she had set her sights on nursing, a career that appealed to her subconscious desire to nurture others in ways she herself had been denied. "Helping people heal makes me feel whole," she once confided to a college roommate, though even then, her words carried a hint of underlying sorrow. She graduated with honors from a state university nursing program, passing her boards on the first try and landing a job at a respected hospital. Patients left glowing reviews, praising her empathy, but few knew that this empathy was a projection, a way to vicariously experience the care she craved. Yet, while her career flourished, her personal life was a series of stumbling blocks. Romantic entanglements began in her early 20s, often with men who mirrored her father's stoicism or, worse, exploited her insecurities. One relationship ended amid accusations of infidelity on her part. Fueled by her growing jealousy, another collapsed when her partner couldn't handle her increasingly frequent retreats into silence during arguments. Trust, that foundational element of healthy bonds, was a foreign concept to Clarissa. She viewed vulnerability as a liability, and when the pain of loneliness became acute, she turned to alcohol as a silent companion. It started innocently, a glass of wine after a tough shift, but evolved into vodka neat, consumed in the privacy of her apartment to numb the ache. Hangovers brought regret, vows to quit, but the cycle persisted, a crutch for the emotional voids left by her upbringing. Experts in addiction psychology explain that individuals like Clarissa often use substances to self-medicate undiagnosed issues, such as anxiety or depression rooted in childhood trauma. In her case, alcohol provided a temporary release valve, allowing her to feel without the risk of exposure. But it also amplified her flaws, turning mild insecurities into paranoia, especially in relationships. By her mid-30s, she had a string of failed romances behind her, each leaving her more guarded, more convinced that love was a myth perpetuated by Hallmark cards and rom-coms. The turning point in Clarissa's solitary existence came unexpectedly during the sweltering summer of 2018. Amid the buzz of a community church barbecue, tables laden with brisket, coleslaw, and homemade pies, the air filled with laughter and the sizzle of grills, she crossed paths with Raymond Ellis. At 41, Raymond was a construction foreman, his broad shoulders and calloused hands testament to years spent under the sun, framing houses and laying foundations in the booming Texas suburbs. He wasn't the type to turn heads with movie star looks. His face was lined from squinting against the glare, his hair thinning prematurely from stress. But there was a rugged authenticity to him, a quiet strength born from adversity. Raymond had endured his share of knocks, a divorce in his 30s that left him emotionally scarred, followed by a bankruptcy triggered by the 2008 financial crisis, which wiped out his savings and forced him to rebuild from scratch. Their initial meeting was mundane, sparked by a shared line at the food table. "Hot enough for ya?" Raymond quipped, wiping sweat from his brow. Clarissa smiled politely, commenting on the quality of the potato salad. But as the conversation flowed, touching on the local high school's football prospects, the rising cost of gas, and their mutual attendance at the church, it uncovered common ground. Both were seeking stability after turbulent pasts. For Clarissa, Raymond's no-nonsense demeanor felt grounding, a contrast to the flighty partners of her youth. He spoke of his work with pride, of building homes that families would cherish, and his words carried a promise of reliability. For Raymond, Clarissa's profession evoked respect. Nurses, in his mind, were pillars of society, capable and caring. Her composed nature suggested she could provide the emotional anchor he lacked. What followed wasn't a passionate whirlwind but a deliberate courtship, marked by weekend dinners at casual Tex-Mex spots, walks in local parks, and tentative sharing of personal histories. Raymond opened up about his bankruptcy, describing the humiliation of losing his home and the determination that pulled him through. "It taught me to value what matters: hard work, honesty, family," he said. Clarissa, in turn, revealed her struggles with past relationships and her occasional battles with the bottle, framing them as lessons learned rather than ongoing issues. "I'm ready for something real," she told him one evening over coffee, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability she rarely showed. They married in 2020, in a small ceremony at the same church where they met, attended by a handful of family and friends. The event was understated, no extravagant venue or designer gown, but filled with genuine hope. Vows were exchanged under a simple arch of flowers, promising to support each other through thick and thin. They purchased a fixer-upper in Denton County, pouring weekends into renovations, sanding floors, painting walls in neutral tones, and dreaming of filling the rooms with laughter. For a brief period, it seemed their union could defy the odds. Raymond's steady income from construction provided financial security, while Clarissa's nursing shifts allowed her to contribute meaningfully. They attended couples Bible study, cooked meals together, and talked of starting a family someday. It was a fragile optimism, built on the belief that two broken people could mend each other's. However, as with many relationships founded on mutual wounds, the cracks began to appear by early 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic had ripple effects on their lives. Raymond's construction projects slowed due to supply chain issues, leading to inconsistent paychecks and mounting bills. Clarissa's hospital work became more grueling, with long hours in PPE and the emotional toll of witnessing patient losses. Stress amplified their individual flaws. Raymond, haunted by his past financial ruin, became hypervigilant about money, questioning every purchase Clarissa made, from groceries to new scrubs. "We can't afford slip-ups," he'd say, his tone edged with accusation. Clarissa, feeling micromanaged, retreated into old habits. Her drinking, which had waned during the courtship's honeymoon phase, resurfaced as a way to unwind after shifts. A glass turned into a bottle, hidden in the recycling bin or consumed in the bathroom. Raymond noticed the scent on her breath, the glassy eyes during dinner, and confrontations ensued. "You're throwing it all away," he'd shout, his insecurities manifesting as control. To Clarissa, these were not concerns but attacks, reminders of her father's domineering ways. Arguments escalated, voices echoing through the thin walls, audible to neighbors who exchanged worried glances over fences. Sociologists studying marital dynamics often point to communication as the linchpin. Here, it was sorely lacking. Instead of seeking counseling, perhaps through their church or employee assistance programs, they internalized the pain. Raymond's suspicions grew, fed by whispers from mutual acquaintances about Clarissa's friendly interactions at work. He began checking her phone, demanding explanations for late texts. Clarissa, defensive and hurt, lashed out with alcohol-fueled barbs, accusing him of paranoia. It was a downward spiral, each fight eroding the trust they had so carefully built. The news of Clarissa's pregnancy in late 2021 arrived like a beacon amid the gloom. Confirmed by a home test and then a doctor's visit, it was greeted with tears of joy. "This is our chance to start fresh," Raymond said, hugging her tightly. Clarissa nodded, envisioning a child as the glue to hold them together. They prepared eagerly, painting the nursery in soft pastels, attending prenatal classes, and sharing baby name ideas. Friends threw a shower, gifting onesies and diapers, and for a time, the arguments subsided. But pregnancy brought its own trials. At 37, Clarissa was considered high risk, plagued by severe morning sickness that left her bedridden some days, and profound fatigue that made even simple tasks daunting. Hormonal shifts exacerbated her mood swings, and instead of leaning on healthy outlets like therapy or support groups, she occasionally turned to alcohol for solace, rationalizing it as just a sip to take the edge off. Medical professionals warned against it, citing risks to the fetus, but Clarissa dismissed the concerns, her denial deepened by stress. Raymond's reaction evolved from excitement to doubt. Idle comments from coworkers about Clarissa's EMT colleague, Devin Price, a young, charismatic paramedic who often partnered with her on shifts, planted seeds of suspicion. Late-night texts from Devin, work-related but innocuous, fueled Raymond's paranoia. "Who's this guy?" he'd demand, scrolling through her messages. The requests for reassurance morphed into insistent calls for a paternity test. "I need to know for sure," he'd say, his voice trembling with insecurity. To Clarissa, these accusations were daggers, striking at her integrity during her most vulnerable state. "How can you doubt me now?" she'd cry, the hurt deepening the rift. Each confrontation left them more isolated, the pregnancy, a potential unifier, becoming a battleground. By July 2022, Clarissa's world was a haze of exhaustion. The birth of their daughter, whom they named Amelia after Raymond's grandmother, was a marathon labor lasting over 20 hours. In the delivery room, amid the beeps of monitors and the encouragement of nurses, Clarissa held her newborn for the first time, a wrinkled, pink bundle with a tuft of dark hair, and felt a surge of pure love. "She's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Raymond, by her side, kissed them both, his eyes shining with pride. For that fleeting moment, all seemed right, but the hospital discharge marked the beginning of the end. Home life with a newborn amplified every pre-existing strain. Amelia was colicky, her cries a relentless symphony that echoed through the small house from dusk till dawn. Sleep deprivation set in, turning days into blurry ordeals. Clarissa, recovering from delivery complications including a tear that required stitches, struggled with breastfeeding and the overwhelming demands of motherhood. Undiagnosed postpartum depression crept in, symptoms like persistent sadness, irritability, and detachment that mental health experts recognize as affecting up to 15% of new mothers. Instead of seeking help, Clarissa isolated herself, her nursing knowledge ironically blinding her to her own needs. Alcohol became her secret ally once more. A shot to steady her nerves during Amelia's fussy spells, a glass to unwind after Raymond's probing questions. Coworkers, when she returned to part-time shifts, noticed the telltale signs, the faint odor of liquor masked by mints, the slight tremor in her hands. At home, Raymond observed the empty bottles in the trash, the slurred words as she rocked the baby. His concern twisted into contempt. "You're a mother now, act like it," he'd snap, his words like salt in her wounds. Family and friends saw the red flags waving furiously. Clarissa's sister, Monique, a schoolteacher living nearby, visited often and confronted her directly. "Sis, this isn't you. You can't drown your problems in a bottle when that little girl needs you sober and present," Monique urged during one tense afternoon, her voice laced with worry. But Clarissa, defensive and ashamed, brushed it off. "I'm fine. Everyone struggles at first," she'd retort, changing the subject. Raymond's family, too, expressed concerns, but their interventions were met with resistance. The home became a pressure cooker, simmering insecurities, neglected mental health, substance abuse, and the corrosive acid of mutual distrust. All it required was a single spark to explode, That spark ignited on the night of August 29, 2022. Raymond had stayed out later than usual, grabbing beers with coworkers after a grueling day on the site. He returned home around 10 p.m. to the familiar cacophony, Amelia's wails filling the air, Clarissa seated at the kitchen table with a half-empty glass of vodka, her eyes red-rimmed from tears or fatigue or both. The scene was a powder keg. "Why is she crying again?" Raymond asked, his tone accusatory rather than concerned. Clarissa shot back. "Because she's a baby, Ray. What do you expect?" He scooped up Amelia, attempting to soothe her with awkward bounces, but his frustration was evident. The conversation devolved rapidly. Old grievances resurfaced: money, trust, her drinking. Then, in a moment that would prove fatal, Raymond voiced the doubt that had festered for months. "Be honest with me, Clarissa. Is she really mine? Or is she that empty guy's?" The words hung in the air like a noose, tightening around Clarissa's psyche. All the accumulated pain, the physical toll of pregnancy and birth, the emotional betrayal of constant suspicion, the hormonal storm of postpartum, amplified by alcohol, coalesced into a blinding fury. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice raw. The argument escalated into a verbal maelstrom, insults flying like shrapnel. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, though they dismissed it as just another fight. Exhausted and defeated, Raymond retreated to the spare bedroom, slamming the door with a finality that echoed through the house. Left alone with the still crying infant, Clarissa's mind fractured. Forensic psychologists would later speculate that she was in the grips of postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe condition affecting about 1 to 2 in 1,000 mothers, characterized by delusions, hallucinations, and a detachment from reality, often exacerbated by substance use. In this altered state, rage overtook reason. Sometime after midnight, with the house cloaked in darkness, Clarissa approached the crib. She lifted Amelia, swaddled in a soft blanket, and carried her to the kitchen. Her actions, pieced together from evidence, defy comprehension. Opening the door of the standard household microwave, a mundane appliance meant for reheating leftovers, she placed the infant inside, closed the door, and pressed start. The machine hummed to life, its turntable rotating slowly as electromagnetic waves penetrated the tiny body. Microwaves operate by exciting water molecules, generating heat from the inside out, a process that cooks food evenly but, when applied to living tissue, causes catastrophic internal damage. For 1 to 2 minutes, as estimated by pathologists based on the extent of injury, the radiation assaulted Amelia's organs, superheating fluids and tissues while the less hydrated skin remained relatively unaffected. The cries ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. When the timer beeped, Clarissa removed the now lifeless child, her expression, whether blank with shock or twisted in defiance, lost to history. She placed Amelia back in the crib and, overwhelmed by the enormity or numbed by intoxication, collapsed into bed or onto the couch, slipping into unconsciousness. The next morning dawned with a deceptive normalcy. Raymond awoke to an unnatural quiet, the absence of cries more alarming than their presence. Rushing to the nursery, he found Amelia cold and rigid, her tiny features frozen in eternal repose. Panic seized him. He dialed 911, his voice breaking as he described the scene. "She's not breathing! Oh God, help!" Paramedics arrived within minutes. But their efforts, chest compressions, oxygen, were futile. At the hospital, the ER team's confusion turned to horror as scans revealed the internal carnage. "It's like her insides were boiled," one nurse murmured, the words capturing the collective revulsion. The term, microwave injury, emerged in hushed discussions, a method so aberrant it strained belief. The case was immediately flagged as suspicious, far from a standard sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS incident. Lieutenant Samuel Ricks, a grizzled detective with the Denton County Sheriff's Office specializing in crimes against children, took the lead. With over 20 years on the force, Ricks had seen his share of horrors. But this one stood apart. His team secured the scene, seizing the microwave for forensic analysis. Swabs revealed Clarissa's fingerprints on the door and controls, absent Raymond's. Empty vodka bottles in the sink and blood alcohol tests confirmed her intoxication level. During interrogation, Clarissa was evasive, her speech slurred even hours later. She shifted blame to Raymond, claiming he resented the baby and had threatened harm. But alibis held. Raymond's coworkers confirmed his whereabouts earlier, and his grief, witnessed by responders as raw, gut-wrenching sobs, was genuine. Autopsy results sealed the narrative. Cause of death was hyperthermia from microwave radiation, with no external trauma. Timeline analysis placed the act during Raymond's sleep. Neighbors' statements about the couple's volatile history added context, painting a picture of a home on the brink. The legal odyssey began with Clarissa's arrest on charges of capital murder, a crime that in Texas carries the possibility of the death penalty. The first trial in 2023 was a media circus, drawing national attention for its gruesomeness. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence meticulously. The microwave's model, radiation patterns matching the injuries, Clarissa's prints. Defense attorneys argued diminished capacity due to postpartum psychosis and alcohol impairment, calling experts to testify on mental health. But the jury deadlocked, some unable to reconcile the act with maternal instinct, leading to a mistrial. A second trial later that year refined the approach. Prosecutors focused on premeditation, highlighting Clarissa's nursing knowledge. She knew the dangers, and her rage as motive. This wasn't an accident, she weaponized a household appliance against her own flesh and blood, the lead attorney thundered in closing. The jury convicted, sentencing her to life without parole. Yet, justice faltered when an appellate court overturned the verdict on a technicality, flawed jury instructions regarding mental state. The third trial in 2024 was exhaustive, with enhanced expert testimony on psychosis but countered by evidence of Clarissa's lucidity post-act. The guilty verdict was reaffirmed, life sentence intact. Appeals continue. But for now, Clarissa resides in a Texas women's prison, her case a benchmark for postpartum-related defenses. The saga of Clarissa Monroe transcends a singular atrocity. It's right a multifaceted mirror reflecting societal failings.
It's just awful.
At its core is the epidemic of untreated mental health, particularly postpartum disorders. Statistics from the American Psychological Association indicate that up to 80% of new mothers experience baby blues. But severe cases like psychosis often go undiagnosed due to stigma or lack of screening. Clarissa's story underscores the need for mandatory postpartum mental health checks integrated into routine pediatric visits. Alcohol abuse plays a villainous role, eroding judgment and amplifying impulses. Substance use disorders affect millions, yet resources for mothers are scarce. This case calls for expanded support programs, like sober parenting groups or hospital-based interventions. Toxic relationships, built on suspicion rather than trust, form another layer. Family therapists emphasize communication training and premarital counseling, yet many couples, like Clarissa and Raymond, skip it. Prevention could involve community education on red flags, jealousy, control, isolation. The failure of systems to protect vulnerable infants is glaring. Where were the child welfare checks when neighbors reported fights? Healthcare providers who saw Clarissa's struggles? This highlights gaps in social services, advocating for proactive reporting and follow-up. Broader societal implications include media's role in sensationalizing such crimes, potentially desensitizing the public, versus using them to drive change. Similar historical cases, though rare, like the 2005 Ohio incident involving a microwave death, show patterns of maternal filicide linked to mental illness. Urging research funding. On a philosophical level, this forces us to confront human capacity for evil. Are we all one breakdown away from the unthinkable? It challenges notions of forgiveness, rehabilitation, and punishment. A life sentence may satisfy justice, but does it address root causes? This narrative leaves an indelible mark, reminding us that true monsters are often born from unchecked demons within: rage, despair, illness, unleashed in storms of circumstance. Over to you, the Killer Next Door community. This deep dive challenges our views on justice, mental health, and responsibility. Do you believe the life sentence is adequate? Could interventions have averted this? Share your insights in the comments. Introduce yourself. Where are you tuning in from? Shoutouts to viewers in Houston, Paris, Melbourne, or anywhere else. Your voices strengthen our community. If this exploration into humanity's darkest realms resonated, like, subscribe, and bell for more probing tales on crime, consequence, and the human spirit.